Hello to you and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran, about to present episode 42, part 7 of my series on the Hoysalas. We are at a significant junction of history, with Vishnuvardhana, after converting to Vaishnavism, shaking off his self-imposed quiet and getting ready for war. We are at 1116 AD, and that's when Vishnuvardhana and his forces were planning the attack on the Cholas, who were ruling Talakadu. But first, a word of thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group. They make this podcast possible through their corporate support. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. After almost a decade of peace and quiet, the Hoysala people were again called to arms. Vishnuvardhana's target was the prized Gangavadi, or rather the rest of the Gangavadi, since the Chalukyas had already carved out a piece of it from the Cholas, and the current Hoysala chief was the governor. Vishnuvardhana had served in this role, so before attacking Talakadu, he would have been aware of everything: terrain, scope of the opposing army, and it is not a stretch to assume that he would have had a few non-combative meetings with the Chola governors of the Chola-held part of Gangavadi on more than one occasion, as neighbors often do, even neighbors who don't like each other. Everyone knew everyone. But when it comes to war, every piece of information is valuable intel. And Vishnuvardhana and his main generals, Mariana and Ganga-raja, would have planned the battle to the last detail, the strategy, the plan, and importantly, the timing of the attack. The last part, timing, appears to have played a crucial role in Vishnuvardhana's victory over the Cholas, as it will transpire soon. Now, defending Talakadu was a vassal of the Cholas, Adiyama, or Idiyama as he's sometimes known. Now, the Cholas weren't there personally. It would seem that after over 100 years of rule, the Chola ruling class had left Gangavadi, leaving the defense of Talakadu to this Adiyama. When the plans for the invasion of Talakadu were drawn up, the strategy appeared to rely on the element of surprise. Surprise not in the manner of sneaking up on the enemy, which of course would have been impossible with such a large army, but everything around it. And one of those strategies involved getting the support of all the smaller principalities and the political interests of the area, not to mention the support of the population. Now, winning the support of local people has always been at the heart of any smart war strategy. Armies depend on the locals for food, shelter, logistics, but most importantly, information. A friendly population can make an army's job much easier by pointing out enemy movements, providing safe places to rest, or simply keep the supply chain running smoothly. But when the locals aren't on your side, things can go quickly downhill. Supplies dry up, surprise attacks become common, and the revolts start to brew. Even worse, the locals might team up with the enemy, turning a straightforward military campaign into a long and costly struggle. That's why successful leaders in history didn't just rely on brute force. They made an effort to win over the people by offering fair governance, protection, and respect for their customs and needs. Now, they understood that an army can only march as far as the people are willing to let it. In the end, the support of the local population often decides whether a war will end in victory or complete disaster. There are plenty of examples in history that show how important it is to have local support during a war. Sun Tzu's Sun Tzu's Art of War, that was written in the 8th century BC, the famous Chinese military guide, talks about the value of winning hearts and minds of the people. The Roman legions were also smart about this. They didn't just conquer territories, they set up colonies and later integrated with the locals to keep things stable. And in guerrilla warfare, local support is everything. A great example would be the role of the French resistance in ending German occupation during World War II. So an army can only go as far as the people let it go, and ultimately victory often hinges on winning over the local population. So the Hoysalas secured local support. But how did they achieve that? So easily, as it seems. And the answer to this question I actually covered in an earlier episode titled The First Rays of the Hoysalas. This is about the period of the rise of the Hoysalas. But I have you covered here anyway. So when the Chola started ruling Gangavadi, they were not unwelcome initially. In fact, some accounts say that the powerful merchants guild of Aihole, the Ayabole 500, with deep ties to Tamaragam and Sinhala areas, invited them as things were not great for trade under the previous Palegas and they felt very destabilized and they were in need of some sort of continuity and protection. A little bit about the Ayabole 500. Their fame had spread across the south and across different parts of the world because they had been instrumental in facilitating international trade for whichever kingdom and dynasty tried to do that. The Ayabole 500 had a code of conduct that relied on virtues, truth, purity, good conduct, wisdom, humility, prudence. Now, these were protectors of the Bira, Bananju, Dharma. It's all the law of heroic traders, as they were called, and they were remarkable in many ways. They said that they were born to wander across many countries. They said they carried the earth as their sack and used the serpent race as their cords, and they kept the beetle pouch as their hidden pocket and took the horizon itself as their guiding light. Now the Cholas were progressive rulers and importantly they were friends of trade. Progressive in the sense that they had instituted and formalized local rule in the villages. So the villagers had autonomy over what went on in their village and very often even the Chola central government could not overrule the local panchayat. And they were friends of trade. So one ruler, Kulothunga Chola, for instance, even had created a division of the army called the Balangai Mahasena, or the Army of the Right Hand, to secure trade routes and offer protection to merchant guilds. This move not only kept traders safe, but completely boosted commerce right across Gangavadi for as long as there was peace. But as time passed, the Cholas were being pulled in different directions elsewhere. They ended their personal presence in Gangavadi and gave up the administration to local Palegars again. Even the right-hand army had divested its responsibility to the leaders of these nadus and let the traders do what they liked. And once again, with only arm's-length support but no direct involvement of the Cholas, these provincial rulers started to get powerful and then out of hand, and then they started losing the support of the locals. And around 1104 AD, the Hoysalas under Balala I decided that this was an opportunity to oust the Cholas. This was also around the time that Balala had been appointed as governor of the portions of the Gangavadi that Chalukyas were ruling, and therefore they would have developed deep ties with the powerful merchant communities who were the most vested in peace and continuing stable government. And in 1116 AD, the situation in Gangavadi, with the Cholas acting as absentee landlords, the Chalukyas on the wane, and with Vishnuvardhana finding his new energy after converting to Vaishnavism, the time was right. When I return from this break, the battle for Gangavadi and the attack on Talakadu. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
All the information we have on the Battle of Gangavadi, which is what I choose to call it, comes from inscriptions that have been dated back to 1117 and 1118 AD, which first date the battle itself to Shaka 1039 or 1116 AD. A large Hoysala force led by its General Ganga-raja marched upon Talakadu. Now, by a passage in a book by the historian Coelho, Ganga-raja had likely advanced from the northwest and he was passing through Kannambadi. Soon, news of their approach reached Talakadu. And the local Palegar, from a well-known family from Dharmapuri, rose to meet the attacking troops. Now, he was locally known as Adiga or Adiyama, names that have shown up in inscriptions. Now, Adiyama made a critical but rather baffling decision that would shape the outcome of the battle. He could have held his position on the east bank of the Kaveri River, and that would have been a stronger defensive stance, and it's impossible to say which way the battle would have gone. But instead, he crossed the river and positioned all his forces with their backs to the river. Now, this move is puzzling firstly because holding the east bank would have allowed Adiyama to use the river as a natural barrier and make it very hard for the Hoysalas to launch a successful attack across it. Crossing the river exposed his own forces and left them cornered with limited options for retreat. Now, why would Adiyama take such a risk? At this point, and I'm going to discount some historical suggestions that say that he was actually secretly siding with the Hoysalas because there is no evidence of that as things transpired. But still, why would he take such a risk? Some say that he may have underestimated Vishnuvardhana's resolve and therefore the attacking army. Now, after all, the Hoysalas had avoided direct engagement with the Talakadu region for nearly a decade, and this was probably during Vishnuvardhana's period of reflection, quiet and reticence prior to his conversion. Now, Adiyama might have assumed their strength was not as formidable as it once was because of this. Maybe he thought that a bold move like the one that he made would catch the Hoysalas off guard. That's the second theory. But here's another theory that baffles even more from a militaristic standpoint. Adiyama may have believed that his troops, who had not faced any serious combat for some time and were not even part of the main Chola army, would be forced to fight more effectively if they had no choice but to stand their ground. With the river at their back, retreat wasn't an easy option. Fear of being trapped might have inspired greater courage and resolve among the men. Now, it's worth remembering that the Kaveri River in those days was wider and deeper than it is now, and it would have been a significant obstacle and a natural deterrent to retreat. So, if you can't run, you have to stay and fight and die if need be. Adiyama's gamble, whether born out of overconfidence or desperation, reflects the complexities of medieval warfare, and even though it might seem absurd and reckless in hindsight, that's the way it was. So his choice to cross the Kaveri and confront the Hoysalas head-on was bold, but it left his forces vulnerable and nowhere to run and hide. The battle that followed was one of those moments in history when the decisions of a single leader, driven by strategy, circumstances, or even instinct, can change the course of an entire region's future. Across the river and ready for battle, Ganga-raja surveyed the scene and might have been equally puzzled by Adiyama's move, but happy that his job had been made much easier. And this is the point, according to Coelho, that Ganga-raja, before the battle started, famously asked Vishnuvardhana to grant him a boon. There's an inscription, and this is probably the more believable one, that said that Vishnuvardhana incentivized his general rather than the general asking for it, and told Ganga-raja before the battle began these words: "If you conquer Talakadu, I will be pleased to grant you a boon." Now, one way or the other, a boon was received. And although Ganga-raja could have asked for anything for bringing, quote, the whole Nadu under one umbrella, the general only asked for land for building a Jain temple. An inscription found in a village near Malavalli describes the primary exchange between the armies, and I assume that this is a part of a long and ongoing military tradition of the attacking army offering the defending army a chance to surrender before they do battle. But in response to Ganga-raja's message, Adiyama refused to surrender the domain that he had been given by the Cholas and sent this reply: "Fight and take it if you can." And this was a call to battle. Ganga-raja obliged his rival by launching the attack. Adiyama's forces were no match for Ganga-raja's forces. Ganga-raja drove Adiyama's army southeast, pushing them along the riverbank until they were forced to retreat into the fortress of Talakadu itself. Now, the puzzling thing is, If you take the description of Adiyama deciding that his troops would stay and fight because the river was too wide to cross, it is puzzling that his fleeing troops were able to ford the river and retreat into the Talakadu fort. Maybe some did, because in the confusion of the retreat, many of Adiyama's troops were lost. The Hoysala troops immediately launched an attack on the fort itself and within a short span successfully captured it. The fate of Adiyama remains uncertain. One theory is that he was killed in the clash. Another says that he made it out safe and he managed to reach the Kanchi headquarters of the Cholas to tell them what had happened. Back in Talakadu, with the fort taken, Vishnuvardhana ordered instructions to his generals to pursue the other of Adiyama's generals who had failed to come to Adiyama's aid. One of them, a man named Damodara, fled in the direction of Kanchi also, seeking refuge, while another, Narsimhavarma, tried to escape but he was caught and killed near Benagiri. This lengthy account of the battle was from Coelho. The Hoysala inscriptions that describe the battle are ghoulishly delighted in their narrative. One example of this in effusive poetry can be found on an inscription that dated back to 1175 AD, which talks about the general Damodara who was trying to escape to Kanchi. It reads, "The Shamanta, Damodara, now turning his back on the fight out of great fear of the blows from Ganga-raja's sword, lives as a Shaiva ascetic, eating from a skull from which even a dog will not eat." Shaiva ascetics eating from a skull also uses the opportunity to make a dig at the Shaiva followers, the Choras being Shaivites and Vishnuvardhana, a recent Vaishnavite. Another inscription says that Rajendra Chola or Kulatanga was disgusted by the waters of Kaveri at Talakadu because Vishnuvardhana had thrown the corpses of the fallen soldiers into it, and now the Chola was obliged to seek water from wells and tanks in the area. Equally hyperbolic was in the same inscription that said that so powerful was Vishnuvardhana that even Yama, the god of death, would not straighten his moustache. But the war was not yet over. For one thing, the Chora High Command seemed to have been taken completely by surprise at receiving news of the Hoysala attack. This probably resulted from a breakdown in standard military preparedness and intelligence, and probably from the complete incompetence of the local Palegar, coupled with a general lull that had been put into with the passive Vishnuvardhana administration of almost a decade. Well, whatever it was, it shook Kulotanga Chola up, and he sent, or maybe he led, an army to Talakadu. But this had to be an ill-prepared knee-jerk. A description of the Kaveri being in spate further suggests that this battle took place in the rainy season during the southwest monsoon, so we can further narrow down the time to sometime around July or August. And in these soggy fields of war, the armies again engaged. The rain would have been heavy and it would have hampered the Chora forces. They managed to cross the river, but they were ill prepared to fight, and after their defeat, they couldn't get back across the Kaveri. And this led to one of the biggest, bloodiest massacres of many soldiers. It was this battle that was described earlier of bodies polluting the Kaveri, forcing Rajendra to seek water from wells. There are prashastis to General Ganga-raja that are, of course, over the top with supernatural descriptions of how the Kaveri, even though it was in spate, parted to allow Ganga-raja passage. An inscription in Shravana-Belagola read, "Now the Kaveri, though it swelled and surrounded him, pressing forward with his waters, did not touch the General Ganga." After the battles were done and Talakadu taken, Ganga-raja got his boon granted. What he had asked for was land in the village of Bindiganabile. Now, Bindiganabile is located even today about 50 kilometers north of Mandya. Close to this village are many temples in Jain Basadis, including the famous one at Shravana-Belagola of Gomateshwara. As a result of this and other grants to Jain temples, Ganga-raja became known as the greatest benefactor of the Jains, second only to the famous Ganga general Chamundaraya, who had built the famous monolithic statue of Gomateshwara at Shravana-Belagola. Now, after the battles at Talakadu, Vishnuvardhana's forces marched east and captured another key Ganga capital about 150 kilometers away, and this was Kolar. In Kolar, some Ganga leaders still held authority under the Choras, and some had already switched to the Hoysalas. But after the conquest of Kolar, the remaining Ganga chiefs switched allegiance from the Cholas to the Hoysalas, and they became tributaries of the Hoysalas, and they served their new ruler in regions like Nolambavadi and Nirugunda. And an inscription from 1117 records this: the entire Ganga Mandala paid tribute at Vishnuvardhana's command and obeyed his orders. And now Gangavadi belonged entirely to Vishnuvardhana and to the Hoysalas. The Battle of Gangavadi marked the starting point of a string of conquests that would see the Hoysala universe expand across the south, and the rest of Vishnuvardhana's reign was a blur of battles and acquisitions as he built up the empire. And that is coming up in the next episode, and as we move ahead, the rest of Hoysala gets more and more engaging. Stay tuned for all that excitement. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.